One of the most valuable resources and assets we built as a business was an ambassador program. And so we built that up to now we have like thousands of them. And for us, even just that channel is a 7-figure channel.
Hey, my name is Felix Tia, and I'm the host of Shopify Masters, a weekly podcast powered by Shopify, the easiest way to sell online, in person, and anywhere in between. Each week, we invite entrepreneurs like you to share what they've learned growing successful e-commerce businesses. In this episode, you'll learn why are supplement businesses extremely cost efficient to get into, how to build significant demand for your product through PR before launching, and what is RFM analysis and how it increased their customers' lifetime value almost 40% over the last year. Before we get into our show, I want to share a strategy some businesses are using to help manage cash flow during COVID-19. They're selling gift cards. Gift cards give customers a way to support you right now. We've seen some creative ways to market them, like selling gift cards at a discount, giving special offers for customers who redeem them in the future, and adding free gift cards to high-value carts as a bonus. As part of Shopify's response to COVID-19, gift cards are now available on all Shopify plans, so you can start selling them right away. For more information, visit shopify.com/giftcard. Today, I'm joined by Afif Ghannoum from Biome. Biome is the total microbiome company with products designed to address the critical roles of bacteria and fungi in gut health, and was started in 2016 and based out of Cleveland, Ohio. Welcome, Afif.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so the background, your experience in this industry is kind of a family business. Tell us more about you and your family's experience in the microbiome world.
That's right. So I'm a biotech attorney by background, but my father is considered one of the leading microbiome researchers in the world. To this day, he's funded by the National Institutes of Health here in the US for his research. So in 2016, he did a clinical trial showing that Crohn's patients were developing these very aggressive biofilms in their gut made of bacteria and fungi. And when we looked, we're like, it's kind of interesting. No one's really developed products to address both bacteria and fungi in the gut. We've started to obviously hear about probiotics, but really no one had looked at that and what we call digestive plaque, these biofilms growing against the lining of your gut. So we basically, based on his science, created Biome and developed both probiotics, other supplements, and then gut health test kits akin to something like a 23andMe for your gut.
Awesome. So you have the experience there, the expertise with your father. And how does it get turned into a business of products that you're selling though? Because, again, the expertise, understanding what the problems are, understanding what potential solutions are, and then actually packaging that up in a way that is consumer friendly is definitely a big step, a big leap. What were the kind of intermediary steps in between?
Yeah, that's a great question. So basically what we saw were that there were specific organisms in the gut causing issues. So it wasn't really, honestly, rocket science. What we basically said was, are there probiotic organisms? Are there enzymes that can counter the bad guys that we were seeing in the gut? And so we worked with, different manufacturers, and we came up with a formulation that would work. And then what was really cool about the test side was that my dad's been doing this type of testing at Case Western School of Medicine here in Cleveland for a long time. And after his research got published, a woman in Europe wrote him a letter and basically said, my 2 kids are really not doing well with Crohn's. Could you test their guts? And, he's doing all this academic research for the NIH, but something as simple as that, he just wasn't set up to do, right? So we thought, it kind of doesn't make sense that this level of science exists, but, a woman who wants to see what's going on in her children's guts couldn't easily test it. So we said, let's do it ourselves. So we created a gut testing kit and a software portal that will turn like that DNA genetic testing that we're doing in people's guts into actionable reports. So honestly, it was a lot of reducing that heavy duty academic science into, real products, real tests in a way that consumers could understand, which is at the end of the day, very important. You can have the biggest innovation, but if people don't understand it, it really doesn't matter because they won't end up buying it, you know?
Yeah, you definitely want to talk about your experience and your advice there about taking something that's complex and then making it, again, consumer friendly. But I want to talk about first the product development process. So you mentioned initially before the testing kit was the kind of the products that you would actually consume or ingest. And you mentioned you worked with different manufacturers for this. Was this a process that did you already have manufacturers that you knew of? Like what was the process behind finding the right fit?
That's a great question. So I had done a lot in the over-the-counter drug space, so I knew a lot of manufacturers in that space. On the supplement side, I had never developed a supplement. So, honestly, a lot of it was, and this is something that I think people oftentimes don't realize, that a lot of it comes down to just basic blocking and tackling. And I just started Googling and looking for people who had expertise manufacturing probiotics that were able to help, doing formulation, those sorts of things. And I ended up finding a manufacturer down in Georgia that was our initial manufacturer. And, it really was as simple as filling out a lead generation form on their site and saying like, hey, this is what I'm looking for. Can you help us out?
Now, when you are creating something like supplements, are there, and given your background, are there a lot of regulations, like what's involved in if someone were to, again, try to solve a problem through supplements and they're going out looking for manufacturers, like what kind of regulations or maybe legal concerns should you have going into that?
That's a great question. So as like a general rule, first of all, I think entrepreneurs will often underestimate that anytime you're marketing a product, you're subject to regulations, whether it's the Federal Trade Commission or around like the marketing claims you're making, or in our case, the FDA. So dietary supplements are regulated by the FDA. Now, that doesn't mean we don't actually have to get them approved by the FDA before we sell them, but you have to play within the rules of what's allowed with a dietary supplement. So obviously not legal advice, but general rule of thumb is if you are making claims that your dietary supplement can solve a condition or address a disease, something like that, you're going to need a tremendous amount of science, a lot of clinical trials. Otherwise, you're going to run into FDA issues. So they are subject to FDA regulations. You have to deal with manufacturers that are audited by the FDA, follow good manufacturing practices. So that's one thing. If the nice thing about the supplement space, unlike a gadget, you can actually get up and going pretty cost efficiently, but take your time up front and make sure whoever you're dealing with from a manufacturing standpoint really knows what they're doing. They're audited by FDA. They follow good manufacturing practices. They have good quality systems, because that's going to be important. And especially, if you're trying to grow your business to ultimately sell it, that's also going to be very important, because investors, which we've raised quite a bit of investor capital, they want to know those things. They want to know, like, who's in your supply chain. Is this, do you have legitimate partners? And then honestly, more and more for your consumer, it's a critical marketing differentiator that you can talk about, the quality of your supply chain. That's something people are increasingly aware of and concerned about. So it's actually something. When I started manufacturing over-the-counter products, you did those things so that as a company, you knew you had a good process. But honestly, consumers weren't really that concerned about it. Now they want to know what type of ingredients are in your product. Are they clean ingredients? Do you have artificial ingredients? These are all becoming very important to the consumer. So that's something like on day one, if you're starting from a blank piece of paper or you have an idea, you definitely want to work backwards and understand, like, how can I actually use a great supply chain as a marketing advantage?
So you mentioned that I think the couple facets to this. One is to make sure that you have manufacturers in the supply chain that you can kind of lean on, that they already have their part figured out. They've been audited already, so that they know things are kind of in order on the product side. And then you also mentioned kind of almost like staying out of the crosshairs a bit from like the FDA based on your marketing, based on your claims. How important is it to be able to push the maybe magnitude or the promise of your products, of your claims? I can see how helpful that would be on the marketing side, but also it might invite more scrutiny. Like, how do you balance that?
Yeah. So as a rule of thumb, you just have to feel very comfortable with what you're doing. Sometimes where people get in trouble, and I hear this all the time, you'll hear people say, well, I don't understand why I can't say this. I see these other guys over here making a similar claim. And the reality is because in dietary supplements, most over-the-counter products and even cosmetics are regulated by the FDA. Because you don't have to get pre-approval by FDA, a lot of times people will make pretty wild claims and they'll get away with it until they don't. You know what I mean? So anytime I'm talking to a young entrepreneur who's thinking about the space, I always say, like, listen, push the envelope at your risk, but it is a risk for two reasons. One, obviously the FDA, but more importantly, if you are trying to ultimately sell your business or you're trying to raise investor capital, that's an enormous turnoff to investors if they look at your claims and they're like, you don't have the science to back this up. You know, you're basically building a toxic business. So, you know, from day one, I always say, like, look, do things properly. Like, and actually, before we even launched, I had a law firm opine on our claims. You know what I mean? So that we felt very comfortable if we went down, you know, a certain road with how we were trying to market the products, that we felt very, you know, within the rules.
That makes sense. Does that slow things down when it comes to marketing, when you are looking to change up anything from ads to the messaging on your website, to your packaging? Does it have to go through some kind of, or do you recommend it go through some kind of legal review? Like, how much drag, I guess, do you put on the agility maybe of your business, because you are, you know, again, making sure that you're not putting yourself in a risky situation with the FDA and any claims?
That's a great question. So obviously with my background as a biotech attorney, I was able to do a lot of that review internally. So it really didn't slow us down. But I think a lot of it is just common sense. I've seen people, like, from big companies to even smaller companies, where their regulatory review of the business really does slow things down. But honestly, it doesn't have to. So it truly is a balance between being, like, reasonable in making sure you're not making, like, wild claims and feeling comfortable, but it shouldn't take, you know, we're still iterating ads on a, you know, daily basis, even though we're doing a sometimes pretty quick regulatory review just to make sure everybody feels comfortable. So it doesn't have to be a drag. And I also look at it like, well, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to have a flash in the pan, get something out there, makes, you know, a quick buck and move on to the next thing? Or are you trying to build a sustainable business built on real marketing claims, real science, or real technology? You know, if you're trying to do that, it might take a little more time. But honestly, I think it's worth it.
Yeah, I think what you're getting at too is that you can make any claim you want as long as you can back it up. And you mentioned the extensive science that goes into it. What's involved if you want to make sure that you're backing your claims in a way that, again, is not only goes by the rules of the FDA if they were to focus on you, they'll pay attention to you, but then also honest to your customers. Like, what's the extent of the testing, or what's involved to make you personally feel like confident that you can make these certain claims?
That's a great question. It really depends on your marketing claim. So, for example, if you're making what's called like a therapeutic claim, where you're saying, because I, you know, adjust your microbiome, you will no longer, or you'll have, like, reduced bloating, that's considered like a therapeutic claim, right? So in that, you need a clinical trial, which is double blind, placebo controlled, you know, without getting too technical. But if you're trying to make, you know, a claim like it's non-GMO, well, you can usually just get paperwork from your manufacturer backing that up. You know what I mean? So it really depends on the level. And, you know, the problem is, and sometimes I honestly feel sorry for people trying to navigate this stuff, because it can get really tricky really fast. And an example I always give to illustrate how, like, you know, careful you have to be is, there was a lady I knew a number of years ago. She was had a really cool technology that it was basically a cream that would help eyebrows grow. And if her marketing claim said enhances the appearance of thicker eyebrows, cosmetic claim, a lot less science, right? If you said makes your eyebrows thicker, you have to do full clinical trials and go through FDA drug approval. So those two things, the appearance of thicker eyebrows versus make thicker eyebrows, it sounds very similar, but even that little nuance is the difference between a little bit of science and a ton of science and a lot of money. You know what I mean? So that's where you can trip into some issues. Now, again, not to be a warrior, like, it's very doable. A lot of people have built some enormously successful businesses in this vertical, just being reasonable. You know what I mean? And a lot of times the other trick I'll tell you is that you can go to manufacturers and say, hey, listen, what ingredients do you already have that have clinical trial evidence behind them? So you don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. A lot of times you can rely on other people's science and be able to make a clinically proven claim or a science-backed claim. So there's different ways to get around it.
Oh, that's interesting that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can kind of work off of the work that other people have already done and
exactly.
And kind of, inherit some of those claims. And you mentioned a big part of this is kind of being reasonable and having common sense. And I'm sure it changes from or varies from situation to situation. But if you were to make a claim that then invites scrutiny, is it just like your business is now blown up, or do you just have to pull back on it? And, is it just like a slap in the wrist? And now I cannot say that anymore, but I can keep on running my business, or do they come and shut everything down?
So it can be everything from let me put it this way. It's you kind of don't want to find out, because it can be everything from a Federal Trade Commission fine that invites class action lawsuits and like your company. And by the way, sometimes there's also personal liability, and that's obviously one extreme, all the way to an FDA warning letter, or just the FDA saying, we don't really love that claim. And again, what I've found is the regulators are pretty reasonable. They're just making, their main thing is they will not put up with a product if they don't think it's safe. If your claims are like aggressive, they're going to tell you, you need to stop now. But a lot of times, like if you're reasonable with them and they don't think you're like what they call like a bad actor, they're pretty reasonable with you. You know what I mean? Like a couple of times, like when we've dealt in like a previous business where FDA would be, which they do like common inspections of like manufacturing facilities. And I remember we had a product where we had bought the product from another company, and they, instead of saying water in the ingredient, it said aqua. And FDA said, hey, can you change aqua to water? I said, no problem. Do you mind if I do it on my next manufacturing run of the boxes? And they said, sure. You know what I mean? So like, they weren't looking to like cause us huge problems, but they're like, hey, listen, this is something you need to adjust, So again, it all comes down to, are you being reasonable? Are you trying to do things in good faith? That's honestly like going to be a lot of the guidance. And it's very tempting, especially when you see, you'll see these huge businesses being built. And sometimes you see claims that are absolutely wild. And you just have to be like, you know what? That's not what we're trying to be. Like, you really just have to kind of have that discipline. It sounds boring, but like, we're trying to build something like that has real long-standing value over time.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I think what I'm hearing from this is that a couple of things, that these regulators is not like a monolith. There are people that work there and they're reasonable, and don't let this, obviously things that you should be aware of, but don't let it deter you from entering this space, again, as long as you're reasonable and resourceful, like using existing claims from other ingredients that are already in your product. And lastly, you get a lawyer's advice on all of this. I think it sounds like
of course,
the best path. So one other thing you said earlier was about how one interesting aspect or characteristic of this particular product category is that supplements are cost effective, other than compared to like maybe other tangible or other physical goods or gadgets. Talk to me some more about like what makes the supplement space specifically a cost efficient business to get into, specifically from the manufacturing side.
Yeah. So, what I love about it, and we call them like specialty chemical businesses. So anything that like a supplement, anything that's a liquid, you can squeeze out of a tube, a lotion, almost like I can't actually think of an exception to the rule. They're very cheap to make. You know what I mean? So like a shockingly expensive supplement to manufacture will be in like the $10 range. You know what I mean? But most you can make for a couple of dollars. And if you take your time, you can usually find a manufacturer that will make, maybe 1,000 unit, couple thousand unit initial run. So your all-in initial investment is you can get up and going for a couple $1,000s, right? Now you compare that to, and that's what we'll often do if we're introducing a new product and we're like, we feel good about it, but let's see. we'll do a test run. We'll buy, 5,000 units, which for us at this point is like a very small run. And we'll see like, oh, okay, it worked. Then we'll order a much bigger run of product. Gadgets, that's not easy to do, right? Like it's you have everything from molds you have to buy, the engineering that goes into it, just the sheer cost of the manufacturing. It can be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to even just get in market. So I always love specialty chemicals and supplements because the margins are extremely high. It's a really strong margin profile. And you can get started with, I think our initial run of Biome was maybe 1,000 bottles.
So 1,000 bottles. What was the first product that in that production run?
So we had a probiotic capsule, we had a prebiotic capsule, and we had a colon cleanse.
And did you have a good understanding of the demand in the market? Like once the production run was completed, did you already have a way to sell this? Like how did you already have the demand kind of pent up for your products?
Yeah. So one of the things, the second I knew we were going to launch, we knew it would take us about 6 months by the time we got, our Shopify site up, manufacturing done. So I had a little bit of time. So I did a couple of things, and this is what I always tell people to do. One, and again, I think sometimes people want to feel like this is harder than it actually has to get a little bit of traction. And sometimes it's really about getting the hustle. So for me, I wanted to build some PR buzz around what we were doing. So what I did is I went to, Upwork, and I hired someone outside the US, and I said, find me a list of all the editors at the top 100 business magazines in the US. And a couple days got it to me. And I cranked out email after email to all the major magazines, like, Entrepreneur, Forbes, all of them. And I said, hey, I'm going to be launching this. I'm taking high science. I'm turning into products, and I want to take your readers on a journey. And I got Forbes to buy in. And so they brought me on as a contributor. And pre-launch, before we even launched, I had done maybe 5 or 6 articles for Forbes and, detailing the journey. And it built a lot of buzz. And the first article about Biome on our launch day was by Goop, who did a big article, and that generated a ton of sales. So for us, I went out there to proactively start that conversation, and it all came from me spending $50 to get someone to put a list of editors together. And it turned into all these amazing, social proof articles about what we were doing that, to be honest, today we still use them in ads.
Yeah, so this approach, I think there's nuances here that I want to dive into. I think it's going to be helpful for a lot of people. So you reached out to Forbes, and it wasn't like, hey, feature my product, feature my company. You're saying, let me write for you about the journey of creating this product, creating this business.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is you hit something right on the nail of the head. Zero magazines and media outlets want to talk about a product. They want to talk about a story, right? My story was, I'm my dad's this famous scientist. I'm an attorney. I'm going to turn his world-class science out of academic ivory tower into a product you can see. And I want to take your readers on that journey. Your readers love entrepreneurial stories, right? So I was explaining to Forbes how I was going to create value for them and their audience. And I also told them I'm going to run ads to these articles. Like, I am already developing an email list. I'm going to be sending this out to people. Like, I was showing Forbes, hey, it's not all about me. I'm going to build value for you as well, right? And so that's how I got an initial shot on goal. And then I had to perform. Like, the articles did well, and they were very in depth, and I was very honest. I laid everything out in these articles of like, the challenges and this and that, and it went really well. And that led to other like podcasts reaching out to me, getting a relationship with Goop. We ultimately ended up hiring a PR firm that leveraged all this pre-launch stuff I had done into other opportunities. So it's very doable. You just have to, and the thing I always tell people, all these media outlets, they have an insatiable thirst for content. Like they need good stories. So if you have something interesting, you have a cool angle, you have a cool personal story, you can get media.
Yeah, I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense about how they don't want to write about a product. They want to be able to tell a story, and you have to come to them with something that is a story that is newsworthy. And you talked about, your father being a world-renowned scientist, and that there's this problem right now where there's all of this, all of this knowledge that's in ivory tower. I want to break down to your readers. I want to bring them along on the journey of starting this business. So this story, as you're talking about it, makes me interested in learning about it. But how did you know that should be the story? Was it easy for you to see, okay, this is the story that I should lead with, or how did you discover that this is what would be interesting to a publication or to the publication's audience?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I knew going into this space that there were already massive probiotic players like coming out of just the giant consumer product companies we all knew. But the one thing I always thought about was, the Dyson vacuum. I remember the ads with James Dyson. And I said, Dad, no one's going to have a Dr. Gnu. We're the only ones that have you. So that's going to be our story. It's like taking this scientist's science and his son translating it, right? And so I didn't know it would work, candidly, but you try and you start seeing, like, for example, at first we thought, oh, biofilm is going to be really interesting to people. And what we found was people appreciated it, but it was such high science. It was sometimes confusing, right? So we basically were like, listen, you should trust us because this guy has published over 490 papers. His work's been cited by over 27,000 scientists. So you may not know much about probiotics, but what we found is our customers will tell us now when we do consumer research, hey, I didn't really understand probiotics, but what I understood is this guy is an NIH-funded scientist that knows what he's talking about. I bet his product's good,
Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the show, please leave us a review on iTunes to let us know what you think or what you'd like to hear more of. Now, let's get back to the interview. That makes a lot of sense. So I want to talk now about the actual act of taking something that's complex and bring it down to a level where a consumer understands why it's important to them. Now, so talk to us more about that. Like, what was the process of translating a lot of these discussions, this knowledge that was hidden away from the general public into a way that made sense to people, and then made sense in a way where they recognize that they should care about this information?
100%. So we realized early on this was going to be complex, right? Like if we just talked and stayed in the high science, we're going to lose, people just start with glaze over. So we reduced it to a very, very simple premise, which was your gut has bacteria and fungus, your probiotic should too. And then we harped on this idea that, if you weren't getting both bacteria and fungi, you were only addressing half the issue. And that simple sort of positioning, again, you may not even understand why you have bacteria and fungus in your gut, but when it's very logical, it's what I call YouTube logic. It's something that it's a very simple logical step, and they may not understand quite why it's an important step, but they see it. So for example, I made the connection. Did you know you have bacteria and fungus in your gut? Okay, I didn't know that. Did you know most probiotics only deal with bacteria? Yeah, we're all aware of Activia and all these, products that have been around forever talking about good bacteria. Did you know that Biome has bacteria and fungus in its probiotic? Don't you think you need both? So that was enough of a hook to get people to say, oh, okay, that's interesting. I didn't know there was fungus in my gut, and then they'd start to explore. And then, through email, through middle of the funnel ads, we start explaining the science a little more deeply, right? And that's how we really broke down this very sophisticated, like probiotic approach to, did you know there's bacteria and fungus in your gut? Don't you think your probiotic should have bacteria and fungus?
So, and I think what you also talked about here was about how you didn't hit them all at once with this information. You kind of hooked them at first, and then kind of trickled it out to them. Talk to us more about that. Like, well, what's the ways that you've been able to connect or contact your prospective customers to bring them further down this funnel?
Right. So one of the most valuable resources and assets we built as a business was an ambassador program. And so we built that up to now we have like thousands of them. And for us, even just that channel is a 7-figure channel. But what I always tell people is that the most valuable part of our ambassador program is the way they've taught us how to talk about biome, because they are experts at positioning a product to their audience, explaining the complex science. So for us, that was such an invaluable tool, because a lot of times we realize, wow, they're way better at explaining this than we are, right? So like we approached it by one, after a while, we had so much of this UGC, user-generated content, that we would use that in a top of the funnel ad, right? And then on retargeting, we would have a blog post talking about, what's up with fungus in the gut. Then, we got articles in places like Mind Body Green, Muscle and Fitness, and they even more simplified, like the buzzy new probiotic that's got this secret ingredient. You know what I mean? Or like, is your probiotic missing this key ingredient? They would use these little phrases, right? And so we, from the top of funnel to middle to obviously the bottom of the funnel, we would slowly drip out more information. And then we did things like we built a microbiome podcast that's downloaded. Every episode's down now maybe like 3,000 times an episode, which for, a topic like the microbiome is not bad. But we knew some of the audience, they wanted in-depth interviews with experts. Other people just wanted to understand there was a scientist behind it, and that was good enough for them. But most people are kind of in the middle. They want a little bit of it, but they don't want to get overwhelmed.
So this ambassador program, where you're learning about hearing from your ambassadors how to speak to your customers as well. You mentioned this is now a 7-figure channel. Talk to us about how this was built up from the ground up. How were you able to find ambassadors that would be good representatives of your products?
Yeah, it's a great question. So again, it's really not that complicated. The complicated part is the consistency. So really what we did is we reached out to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people every week. And we had an intern at first doing it. And the premise was pretty simple. Like, hey, we have this new product. We see you're into fitness and health. We'd love to send you a sample. We didn't ask them for anything. We didn't say we'd love, and I think that's where a lot of people make mistakes. They're very aggressive on the first outreach. And it's a turnoff. If again, it's all about how are you helping them? Right. And so we'd say, your audience is really into wellness. You talk about gut health, wanted to share the science behind our probiotic and send you a sample, see what you think. Like we're helping them. We looked into seeing that they actually care about this topic. Their audience is going to care about this topic. And what we found is that really resonated. And then, if we saw they would post, and we'd say, hey, thanks for posting. Did you know we have an ambassador program, and, we'll pay you a commission if anybody buys through you. And slowly but surely, we built that up. And we have people that, make $20-$30 a month, all the way to, we have some ambassadors that individually their commissions in the tens of thousands of dollars a month. And it all, to this day, we just do individual reach out, manage it all on a spreadsheet. It's really not complicated. The hardest part is just the consistency, seeing who's posting. We do little contests. So happy to explain that further.
Yeah, I think a couple of questions here. One is that you mentioned, again, how you learn a lot about the marketing and messaging about your product from your ambassadors. Were there some big eye-openers about how they spoke about your product or the topic that, for someone like you or a company like yours, where you have a lot of the context already, that you just totally glossed over, that they just found some way to connect?
I'll give you a great example. What we saw, because initially when we launched, we just had capsule products. And when we saw a lot of ambassadors that were parents, they were opening up the capsule and they were asking us, can I just put the powder in my kid's yogurt? And we're like, sure. Well, why do you want to do that? Well, they won't eat a capsule, but if I mix it in, they'll take it. And so we're like, oh, that's kind of interesting. So it actually ended up turning us on to the idea that we should create powdered versions of our products. So we ended up launching a super greens and super reds on seeing that all these ambassadors were trying to like food hack stuff for their kids and for themselves, like in a protein shake, that sort of thing. And those products, the greens and the reds, are now our number 1 and number 2 products, all from seeing this insight of an ambassador, opening the capsule so they could show a yogurt hack to their audience.
Wow. So not just learning about how to talk about it, but then also what kind of products to develop based on how they were using the different use cases for your product.
And I think that's a key point is we always talk about internally, like ego is what's right. Ego is who's right. Truth is what's right. So like, we didn't care where the idea came from. Like when we saw it, we're like, that is a great idea. There's a product there. You know what I mean? So it wasn't like we were like, well, they're an ambassador. What do they know? No, we're seeing their boots on the grounds. This is how they're actually using the product. Right. So I think that's really important to keep your eyes open for ideas, wherever they come from.
That makes sense. Now, you mentioned too that the complicated part about the ambassador program. Well, first of all, I think I want to reemphasize that you mentioned that it's not as complicated as people think. You still manage this seven-figure channel through a spreadsheet, but the complicated part is almost at a human psychology aspect of it. How do you keep the ambassadors consistent? I heard you mention a couple of things around contests. Like, what other ways have you found to keep your ambassadors excited and consistent with promoting the product?
Great question. So we do a couple of things. One, we run the entire program with two people, and I think this is important because especially when iOS changed, not to get into the weeds with all the Facebook advertising, everybody saw their cost of acquisition go up. Our cost of acquisition for an ambassador sale, one, it was a much stickier customer because someone was buying because they trusted an ambassador. But two, it was 10x lower cost of acquisition compared to our paid advertising channel. So like just incredibly valuable channel for us. So the way we encourage them is we do a number of things. We look at this as like, how would I want, these are not, because everything's done over these digital channels now, but these are people, right? So like, ambassadors that were starting to get some traction, our team would reach out to them, send them a quick email, like, hey, happy to jump on a quick call. One of the things that really was important is we created all sorts of lifestyle photos, all sorts of recipes with photos. And we basically did a big Dropbox folder and we said, listen, grab whatever you want from this so that we're making your life easier to post about Biome. Because, if every time they want to do like a really nice photo, featuring the product for their audience, that's a lot of work. So we were basically like, listen, we're going to help you. We're going to create the assets, help you do that. The other thing we did is we would do contests around, we're going to do, because the problem is you're going to have some ambassadors that are the giant producers. And then you're going to have some people that they just try, but they don't have a big audience and they really don't produce a lot of money. So we would do contests based on sales, but then we would do other contests based on best piece of content produced. So whether you had 500 followers or you had 500,000, the person with 500 followers could win that contest if they produced a really killer video. And a lot of those videos we would end up using in ads or testimonials. So a lot of contests. And for us, I look at this as a cost of acquisition situation. So we would give them prizes like cash prizes. You know what I mean? I think a lot of times people get very finicky about, well, it costs money. And no, listen, it costs money to make money. Like, you reward these people. People will do things if they're being rewarded. And then plain old recognition. Like, we do emails. We have a private Facebook group and we do email lists and we will recognize ambassadors. And we've had like top performing ambassadors on our podcast to talk about, their gut health journey. We send their story out to tens of thousands of our subscribers, our monthly subscribers, telling their story. Like, that's awesome for them. You know what I mean? Like, we really put them up on a pedestal. So it's really making them feel like they're an important part of the business, not just a commission generator,
Makes sense. So a couple of things I picked up from that was make it easy for these ambassadors, make sure you have the assets, make sure that there's as little friction as possible for them to create the content, and then also celebrate and reward the ambassadors for the work that they're doing, whether that means sales or creating amazing content that you can then repurpose and use later. And I think one other thing I heard about this ambassador program is that, and you mentioned to us in the pre-interview process, which was that acquisition is important, but retention is critical. Talk to us about how important the ambassador program is in that regard between acquisition and retention of a customer.
It's a great question. So the way I look at it is that the ambassadors, their job in the funnel is the acquisition piece. Now, when they bring a customer in, they're very warm, right? So we'll see, because we do a survey after people purchase, like, how did you hear about us? even though we spend a lot of money on paid acquisition, the number one way people hear about us is through an ambassador. And the reason they purchase is because they trust what they're hearing from this person. So they're very important. But on the retention side, it really comes down to really understanding who your customer is. So we do a lot of what's called like RFM segmentation, where we're looking at the recency, like how recently have they bought, the frequency, like how often are they buying, and the monetary, like how much are they actually spending with us. And it was really eye-opening to us when we did that analysis, and we could see like, wow, we have this, 20, I'm just making this up, but like 25% of our customers are soulmates. These people love us. And guess what? They're worth 20 times this other group of people that are most of our customers. But honestly, what we found is they're really just bargain shoppers. They don't really care about the Biome story. It was just, we were the probiotic on sale when they came into our world, right? And so once we started understanding through our data who our best customers were, then we started going to like actually picking up the phone and talking to them. Like, why do you love Biome? Like, what was it that brought you? What were you struggling with? And what we found was, they really trusted our science. These were people buying products from some of the biggest companies in the world. And they're like, it's just an impersonal giant, brand. Whereas your dad, like, I trust him. He to the fact that he's a real scientist, like that makes me feel good about the product. So that allowed us to even tighten our messaging more, because we saw like these are the things people actually care about. Like it's funny, we had actually thought initially that a lot of our customers were like CrossFitters, fitness enthusiasts, like optimizers. And it turns out they're like 5% of our customers. Most of our customers are people that they're dealing with pretty serious digestive issues, and they're looking for something that in their estimation makes them feel better. You know what I mean? So by understanding our customers, we were able to really, really optimize our retention. And so, we saw our retention, we saw our customer lifetime value over double over 12 months when we started really paying attention to retention. So happy to talk about, some of the systems we use on that front too.
Definitely. And you mentioned this a couple of times, RFM analysis. What is that?
Right. So what it's doing is it's taking your customers and bucketing them based on three things: R, F, and M. R is recency. How recently have they bought a product? Like, have they bought within the last 30 days, or has it been 6 months, right? And obviously, the more recent they've bought, the more valuable they are. Frequency is how often do they buy? Do they buy on average 2 times, or do they buy, 12 times? Frequency is the number one factor in building your customer lifetime value. So for us, that was a critical one to look at, right? And so that's R, that's F, and then monetization. How much are they actually spending with us, right? So the most valuable customers have a high R, high recency, high F, high frequency, and high M, right? And so those are called, we call them soulmates. And then you'll have on the other side of the equation, people that haven't bought recently, they don't buy frequently, and they don't spend a lot. Those are your worst customers. But ironically, a lot of times, those are your biggest pilot customers because you ran a giant sale at some point. They came in Black Friday or something like that. But you're really not making a lot of money off of them, but you're still spending a lot to acquire them. So RFM analysis helps you figure out which customer segments should I really be concentrating on and going after finding more of those people. So that analysis we were actually doing by hand. We have a data scientist, and it was laborious. So we ended up finding a great Shopify app named Reveal that does it all automatically. And so from that, we're able to see like, okay, these people are most valuable. We got to find more of these. These guys are less valuable. Let's put them off to the side. And it's been just eye-opening and game-changing for the business.
Yeah, I think an important thing to talk about here is that there are these different kind of classes of customers, right? These soulmates and the others that score lower in the RFM analysis. And I think what I'm hearing is that the action item that you take out of this is to go after more of these RFM or high RFM customers, these soulmates, and find where you are maybe spending too much investment in going after the lower scoring ones and maybe cutting that out. And I think that's interesting because I think a lot of people would think, okay, every customer is the same. Let me just get more and more and more. But you're saying there are certain kinds of customers and that they maybe even respond differently to marketing or to get them into your funnel to begin with. So can you talk more about that? Like, is there a certain point where you're like, okay, let's try to just get as many customers as possible, regardless of their likelihood to become a soulmate?
So when you're starting off, that's what you have to do. Just, you got to figure out, because the last thing you should be doing, and we're all guilty of it, is you walk into a business a lot of times thinking you know who is going to love your product. And a lot of times you don't know until someone takes their wallet out, right? I don't care about customer research, any of that stuff. So someone takes their wallet out and buys from you, you don't know anything, right? So at first you got to sort of sell to whoever you think makes the most sense. But over time, you start to have enough of a base that when you can go in and to your point about soulmates, it's really doing a couple of things. One, I'm not kidding. We literally picked up the phone. We sent emails and we said, hey, listen, thank you. You're like a great customer to Biome. We'd love to get on the phone with you for, 30, 45 minutes, happy to give you a Starbucks gift card or free product or whatever you'd like. And we'd love to learn why you love Biome. And we found out so much. We found out, what we call, what are the jobs that Biome is doing? And we found a number of jobs that we were helping people accomplish, like feeling better, feeling like they were doing the best they could for themselves. And that allowed us to really hone in on our messaging, but also to go find more people like that. Like, we found a vast majority of our customer set, they're older, they're dealing with digestive issues. We weren't really, frankly, targeting them. You know what I mean? So that allowed us to do better targeting, because really all you're trying to do with increasing customer lifetime value, you're trying to do four things, right? You're trying to acquire better customers. So for us, it was trying to acquire more people that were soulmates. Once you have those people in your world, you have to do everything you can to make their onboarding and their experience great, right? Because you should be able to help them, but now you got to make them feel like, a VIP, because they're going to spend a lot of money. Then, obviously, and this seems obvious, but I think a lot of people ignore this, you got to do everything you possibly can to lower churn, right? So, for example, in our customer portal, we use Recharge. We were seeing that our subscription churn a couple of years ago was actually pretty high. When we reached out and we would ask, well, why are you canceling? I have too much product. It's a little more expensive. So we redesigned our portal and we made it super easy to skip a subscription month. Or if someone was struggling because it was a little too expensive, we applied a 20% discount right there. And we saw our churn dramatically drop. And we saw, everything from our loyalty revenue jump to, our subscriber numbers just start to jump, all because we took the time to understand, well, what's this pain point for them, right? And then the last thing we really work on is trying to reactivate, customers that have just become disengaged, right? So what does that mean, right? So for a soulmate, soulmates are not motivated by promotions. They love your product. We hear people tell us, I would pay if it was double the cost, because we solve a real problem for them. But your bargain shoppers that they gave you money to, they're really motivated by promotions, right? So even though they're not your ideal customer, they're still in your world. Maybe you can reactivate them with just a rock solid promotional offer or like a bundling or something like that. So the more you take the time to understand who your actual customer is, you can really improve that retention and you can really improve that customer lifetime value. And especially now with how bad people have seen cost of acquisition going up because of all the iOS changes. I personally believe retention is going to be one of the critical marketing channels moving forward.
Yeah, and I think an important thing to point out here is that this analysis, this RFM analysis to find who your soulmates are, that's not enough. It's just to identify who you should be talking to, and then dig even deep, because a lot of these findings that you're talking about they have too many products, or they maybe want some bundling or something like that. That doesn't come out from this analysis. It only comes out from conversations that you're having with these soulmates. You
absolutely nailed it. Just to put a fine point on what you're saying, because I think that's where people get mistaken. Data won't do anything for you, right? So it's really three phases. One is doing this RFM analysis, doing other retention analysis, really understanding your numbers about your customer. How often are they buying? Like I said, RFM analysis, like what's the days, what are the chances of them buying a second time from you? Once you understand sort of step one, the data, then step two is really understanding who are these best customers. And you do that two ways. Qualitatively, you pick up the phone and you talk to these people. And a lot of people, either they feel they're above that or, we're too big. I'm talking about like 20 people. It's not hundreds. Like just get a sense of who these people are, right? So you do qualitative, you send surveys out, you like really trying to understand like who are these people, and then you do quantitative. Is this as I said, like with RFM analysis, really breaking down who they are just by the numbers, and then the last is like the action items, right? Like I said, once we heard that people were canceling because they didn't know they could skip, well then we fix that. So, it's about better onboarding process. Is your customer service team, helping you sell? Like, do they know about all the promotions that you have going on? Or do they have strong FAQs? So it's really that third part where the magic is made, and it takes a little bit of time, is really improving that, user experience, the type of promotions you're doing by, segment a customer, and then these other things on just your overall UX.
So is it a situation where if you discover a problem that one of your soulmates is having and you are working to solve them, does that spread to all your other customers? Is like kind of one of these, like, what's good for the goose is good for the gander type of things, where you solve a problem for a soulmate and this is the same kind of problem that your less, I guess, lower scoring RFM customers are also getting? Or can there be situations where it's like counter, where you're solving for your best customers, but then hurting the experience for your maybe less valuable customers?
That's a great question. I think overall, if it's good for the soulmates, it's going to be good for the entire process. But I think the main point is that over time, you really want your business directed towards those soulmates. Those are the people you should be trying to serve. And it's really wild. Like when you do the analysis, like we've seen that some customer buckets are literally worth 50 times less than a soulmate. But, we're spending the same amount of money to acquire them. You know what I mean? So it's like, well, isn't our time better spent acquiring less soulmates, but way, way more ideal person for our business? So again, that it takes a while. It can take 6 to 12 months to really see those metrics start to move. But what's wild is when you do the analysis to look at like, okay, well, what happens if our retention rate goes up like 5%? It's an exponential difference to your revenue and your profit because they're already in your world.
Awesome. So you mentioned a couple of apps here so far. You mentioned you use Reveal for this analysis. You mentioned Recharge for subscription. Any other apps that you recommend others check out that you've used to help run the business?
Yeah, so there's the classic ones like Klaviyo. We really have loved Attentive for our SMS. From there, you're going to find, I think for a lot of these apps, from like the pop-ups to things on site, there's a lot of great options out there. Like Just Uno can be great, especially when you're starting off. Now we run pop-ups through Attentive. But those are like, I would say the mega driver apps that we use is Reveal, Klaviyo. Attentive is huge for us. And Just Uno early on was really good.
Awesome. So biomehealth.com is a website. BIOHMHEALTH.com is a website. And I'll leave you this last question. What would you say is the main focus for you over the next year?
The main focus is continuing to really hone in on who our best customers are. And honestly, we're so focused on building just amazing products based on, cutting edge science that we have probably a dozen new products coming over the next year.
Awesome. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your advice and experience, Afif.
I really appreciate it. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Shopify Masters, the e-commerce podcast for ambitious entrepreneurs powered by Shopify.